Welcome to the Inspire Sessions. I'm your host, Ben Fisher. Real people, leading the way, inspiring hope.
How you doing, man?
It's a good day here in Southern Vermont, a little dreary, a little Seattle, but gotta love all weather, gotta love all days in a different way.
It's really good to see your face. Good to have you right here in front of me. I feel like I know you already. I know social media does that a little bit. Like I've watched your videos for quite a while, and so I feel like I know you.
Isn't it beautiful how we get a little glimpse, like
absolutely.
back and forth through the internet lens?
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for, taking a little bit of time out of your day to spend with me. It really means the world, dude. I have a lot of questions, a lot of stuff to ask you about. It's funny because we have a lot in common. It's clear our first name is the same, but I looked at your page and your clean date, and we'll get into your recovery. We'll talk a little bit about that. But your clean date is my birthday.
No way.
Which is interesting. We're both musicians, so I thought that was cool. I don't know if you'd have to go pretty far back in my content on my page to see that. I don't really put my music out there much anymore, but I was a worship leader at a church for 8 years. I think you own a studio or you work at a studio. Is that right?
I am part of the grateful team at the studio. I'm not the owner. I'm the composer in residence, and I help with some projects, and I'm an artist in residence there as well.
Okay. Yeah, I owned and operated a studio, Starfish Studios in Cincinnati, for, over 12 years. I did that. And just recently, in the past couple years, stopped doing that, moved down to South Carolina. But you can't see it here. I got a whole wall of guitars here.
Nice.
Music's a big part of my story. It's a big passion of mine, and really a big reason why you caught my eye. Or I think it was TikTok where I first saw you. I remember the video too, scrolling through TikTok, and it was you on, I think, a baby grand or even a grand piano with the window with the river flowing in the background, and you were doing a song. You were flowing just like the river, man. Like it was so cool. And I'm like, this guy's, I felt inspired after I saw that video. That's the whole reason behind this podcast, Inspired Sessions. So to have you here is just, it's full circle. To see that video, to feel inspired. And then my hope is to inspire others through our conversation and through what we talk about. So.
Well, you're inspiring to me. I mean, your content is a vision, dude. It's a vision for a better life. It's a vision not just of having that better life, but manifesting it through your positive proclamations and self-awareness. And that's amazing that you owned a studio in Cincinnati. I got big love for the recovery and music scene and content creation scene out there, man. It's very rich. It's very diverse. It's a lot of people crusading for hope out there, man. So, and I'm super grateful that the music resonates with you too. I've never heard Flowing Like the River before, so that just made my day. So thank you.
It was great, man. I'm envious of that too. I got zero. I can't say zero, but I have very little flow when it comes to that. I can't rap. I can't do any of that sort of thing. And I just think it's so cool when people can. And
thank you, man. Neither do I. I just go for it.
Go for it and you nail it.
Told me, even to this day, hey, you got no swag, you got charisma. I think what we can all aspire to, regardless of whether we sound like Pac or Slim or NF or Jelly Roll on the mic, is just to tell the truth.
Right.
All I'm trying to do.
And I think people resonate with that,
I hope so.
Absolutely. Yeah. Authenticity, being genuine. There's a lot of fake people out there. A lot of posers, as they used to say back in my day. I don't know how old you are, bud, but back in my days, that was the big word.
33.
Nice.
Posers was around in my day as well, man. All the kids at the skate park when I came through with the wrong type of skateboard. Oh, look at this poser in the classic Maryland, Northern Virginia accent. I'm from DC, but all the skate parks were in the surrounding states. And they'd be, look at this poser. And I'd be like, man, that hurt.
I got a couple years on you. I'll be 40 this year.
Nice.
But it's funny to know that word just it lasted through the ages. I doubt that the kids are saying it today. They probably don't even know what it means, but we know what it means, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, man, they got their own slang. I love Gen Z slang, man. The mother of my kids, she was born in 2000 and me in 91. So her and her sibling always school me on the newest words. I'm out here using them wrong and stuff. They correct me. I love the evolution of language, man. It is crazy.
It's a lot of fun. I have 2 kids, 9 and 6, and my daughter is starting to use some words that I'm like, what? What? A big one right now is slay. Like, yeah, you're so slay. And I'm just like, okay, well, Riz, yeah. I guess each generation has its thing. That's funny.
I'm grateful I've survived long enough for my slang to be irrelevant. That's the lens I choose to see it through. Is I survived my addiction, mental health issues long enough that my slang is dad slang. Like, that is the ultimate blessing, dude.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to look at it, to reframe it, you know. Very cool. And again, that's why you're here, man. I love that, because I want to show people a different way to think. A lot of people are struggling right now, and not necessarily with addiction, but with just hope in general. Things seem dark. Things seem a little bit gloomy right now. So you're a bright, shining light out there in the world, and I want to surround myself with bright, shining lights like you. So thanks again for being here. I do have like some specific things I want to ask you to get into. And if I ask anything and like you're uncomfortable with it, like, no big deal. I'm not going to ask anything too crazy, but you know the drill. If you just want to weave around it, that's fine too.
Everything.
I came across something on your site. I was looking at your site, and it was the story of the scar or the scars. And yes, sir. I would love for you to share that story, if you don't mind. And you can tell it exactly the same, or you can tell it however you want to tell it today. But I thought it was a very powerful and important story to start out with your story.
So I got sober on your birthday, June 13th in 2016. And I'm an IV heroin and fentanyl addict. And not to drug-a-log too much, but the fact that I also injected pills made it that my scars were very pronounced. I degraded my skin. I blew out my veins. And even several months into recovery, out of the treatment center, out of the recovery house, there were big scabs and big 3-dimensional scars. And I got a job that I was blessed to get at this restaurant in Bethesda, Maryland, which is like any upscale suburb in any city. They got a very discerning clientele, and most of the servers there are career professionals. And I was blessed because they normally didn't even hire busboys without any experience. But the thing is that the outfit was a thick dress shirt, a black vest, a black apron, a black tie. And DC, a lot of people don't know this. They think it's mid-Atlantic. DC is the South, baby. And even in September, I got sober in June. I got the job in September. Late September, I've been doing it for like 2 weeks. It was 90 to 95 degrees out, humidity feeling like a Swedish sauna, right? So I'm out there where people got their sleeves rolled up, and I'm pulling all these plates out on this humid patio. And I'm sweating so much that I'm beginning to drop the plates because I'm a total rookie as a busboy for this high-volume restaurant at a job I'm blessed to get. And some of the people there know I'm in recovery and know the real, but most of the managers don't, and I can't be open about it, or so I think. So I'm in this quandary, right, which is I'm sweating so much because I'm not rolling up my sleeves that I'm dropping all these plates, and I'm finna lose my job. People are starting to comment on it. But at the same time, if I roll up my sleeves, I got this real obvious scar from the place I shot up in most, that at the time, before I had this tattoo outlining it, was this big, lumpy scar tissue. And I knew that people would see it and comment on it. But it got to be so hot that I'm like, you know what? I'm going to lose my job. Nobody's going to say anything. It was getting darker. I rolled up my sleeves. And I went into the kitchen. I took this big tub of plates, trying to like hide my arm, hold the tub like this so that the scar is like up against my sleeve. But then something happens. I sort the plates, but as a busboy, we're also bringing out baguette breads because it's a French restaurant, and I'm chilling by the equally hot bread stove, waiting for the baguettes to get ready. I reach down with my left arm, and like clockwork, I think I'm all alone. This server comes up to me, and she's like, "Hey, man, what's up with those scars?" And I froze because I was like, my natural addict or beyond addiction, just wanting to do whatever I could to hide my true self and the negative aspects that I was insecure about. My lack of self-love was like, come up with a lie. So I ran through it. This is all in like a couple seconds, but my brain working overtime, which never served me well, right? So I'm thinking, okay, lie and tell him that it was a surgery. But then I was like, that's not near an elbow or anything. That doesn't make sense. Okay, lie and you got in a fight. What kind of fight is that? A knife fight's even worse than being. And I realized that it was just going to be so much harder for me to lie than for me to tell the truth. And I hung my head in shame because I was like, I'm about to lose my job. But I just looked down and I said, listen, I'm a recovering IV heroin addict. I'm 3 months sober, and I don't want to lose this job because it's the thing that's keeping me sober. I'm in treatment. You know, I go to recovery groups every day. I'm doing everything that I can. I hope you don't judge me, but I can't lie about it anymore. And she looked at me and she said, you know, I got a lot of family members who are alcoholics, and they never got sober. And I just want you to know that I don't know what it's like, but I'm so proud of you, kid. Keep going. And that shame evaporated into a different kind of just overcome almost to tears, but I couldn't cry because I had to keep it moving. But from that moment on, I realized that not everybody's going to be accepting, and not everyone was once word came around. But that was the moment I knew that I didn't have to hide anymore. And ever since then, that little moment has translated into every aspect of my advocacy for mental health and recovery awareness, because I realized that I didn't have to hide any aspect of my scars, physical, emotional, spiritual, or otherwise.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it's kind of where I was going to go with it and ask some questions like, did this impact who you are today? You know, having that moment, you realized, you know, hey, maybe this could actually help somebody. Me being honest and open, because there's this taboo thing in the rooms in AA and NA where some people, old timers, say that you shouldn't be talking about it openly. And then we have our generation and people that are a little bit younger that have friends dying left and right. And we're like, we don't have choice but to talk about it. Some of us, you know, obviously I respect people that want to stay anonymous. But yeah, it sounds like that had a big impact on where you are now and who you are today and why you're outspoken.
Well, it was truly transformative. And I don't get fellowship specific in my content for a variety of reasons, but if you know how I speak, you already know what time it is. Let's just say I ain't afraid to take the stairs when the elevator's broken. And it's a wide staircase and a lot of people walk it at different speeds. Regardless of that direct affiliation, what I began to see is that at the time, social media was not set up the way it is today, where you have reels or even posts, a text, photo, and everything else that was able to reach you if you didn't subscribe to a page or follow a page, or you didn't follow someone who followed it and they shared it. Like, there were people who went viral on social media back then, but you had to come with something real crazy because the algorithm didn't show you stuff you didn't subscribe to. And so I didn't know any recovery pages other than a couple like humor meme pages that people showed me, like my friends from rehab and stuff. And so as I continued to make music about recovery, coming from making music glorifying addiction for years, at first I only had a private Instagram and Facebook, but then I got the opportunity 2.5 years in, when I was happy just working a service job, paying my way through college and working as a peer counselor at the same outpatient rehab that saved my life. I met a man who owned a studio, which I now record at and I'm a resident artist at in Vermont. When I was up working on a little cabin in the woods my dad built with his bare hands and gave me because he's getting on in his years. And so I was up there and I met this guy serendipitously after kind of not giving up on music, but just putting my recovery at the forefront. And what that allowed me to do is, before I got active on social, I had been wanting to share my message for a long time, but there were reservations about, traditions, etc., and all that in line with fellowships. But more than that, I wanted to create something that would have helped me at those moments when recovery wasn't at the forefront of public consciousness. Because as I was navigating the early years of my recovery, a lot of high profile musicians passed away, like Lil Peep, like Mac Miller. And Mac Miller, I had the chance to work with in active addiction when we were both very young before he blew up because of a mutual friend. So that one hit it especially hard. I wasn't his friend, but I had met with him, opened up for him, and done a song with him. And so that it really made me understand that the impact of the addiction epidemic was something that I was obligated to speak on, but I wanted to speak on it in a manner that would have resonated with me in active addiction or early recovery. And what that moment with the scar really did was it made me realize that when I spoke on recovery, it wasn't just for people who have been through recovery and addiction. It was for the families, it was for the communities, and it was for the people that came after me, not just in creative spaces like social media. But I like to think that if any other kid is at a sober house in early recovery working at that restaurant, that seeing me maintain my recovery, be outspoken about it, and carry myself, not just being a sober person, but an accountable person in that space, was laying the groundwork for future people to be open. So that's what the rule that I try to live by with all of my content and all of my music. Is this going to be something that helps the person who was in the same position I was? Is this something that would have resonated with me? And most importantly, is it true? Because it don't matter if you got the right filter, the right caption, the right algorithm post minute or whatever. If it's not something that was actually lived experience, and it's not something that actually crosses the gap to someone still in the struggle like it would have hit me, I don't post it. So it did help me, but there were still things that I had to cross over in terms of getting to the self-love place that I was willing to speak out in the way I am today. It was a process just like recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, and it shows, man. Like I think you're being rewarded for the authenticity, doing things for the right reason. You know what I mean? I believe in that wholeheartedly. And sometimes I lose sight of that. Sometimes I post something to social media and I get upset that it didn't get 1 million views. And it's like, well, hold on, take a step back. You know what I mean? What are we doing here? There was 3 years when I started my social media pages that it was hard for me to get 500 views, over a span of a couple weeks. And that went on for 3 years. And I never thought twice about it. It was always like, if I can help one person, that's all that matters. If one person sees this and it helps them, that fills my heart with joy. And that's what I'm doing this for. But then you start to actually get traction. You get the video that hits 1 million views, and then it starts messing with you. The next video doesn't. So then you had that hit of dopamine. And really, me as an addict myself, it was always chasing that dopamine, right? And that's what the drug did for you, at least initially, until you depleted the dopamine completely. But you were always after that. And we're, once an addict, always an addict. I know that some people disagree with that saying, but those same people also will probably say that they need to be in meetings for the rest of their life to stay sober. And that's because they're an addict or an alcoholic. And, that's where I'm at with it. I think it's really cool that you're doing things for the right reasons. I think you are going to continue to get rewarded for that. And not necessarily saying the reward is, financial, or you're going to get more views, but in your heart, you know what I mean? And that's what matters. That's what matters.
Well, that's the ultimate payment for me. I started making reels not because it was a thing to do. Like, at the point I started making reels, I had already been signed to the studio since January of 2019. We had put out an album, we had done shows and speaking engagements, and I had started a radio show, a local recovery column that went for like 5 years. I just did my last column of it because it's going digital, and I had done 500 callers or something like that. So I've since moved on to digital content. But the point is, when I first started doing it, it was at the advice of my Gen Z girlfriend, who was not in recovery, but she was scrolling through Reels one night. And I was like, what's that? With the trending audio and all that. She's like, oh, it's like these 1-minute videos. You should make them. I was like, nah, come on. I'm old man winner. Like, I'm not going to do that. But at the same time I said that, the algorithm must have heard me. I know they got audio recognition because I started seeing recovery Reels. I started seeing Hunter Michael Shepard, Jimmy McGill, Rachel Elizabeth, Quinn Stone, people from all paths of recovery. And I was like, wow, people are doing this. And it's really powerful. And they're really harnessing this medium and the algorithm in a beautiful way. But I was thinking about, well, what do I do for my Reels? I was thinking of trying how to make them all official, how to get the right lighting. And there is something to be said to that, especially in podcasts, Patreon. Like, if you do it professional, do it to it. It's a real art form, and it's a beautiful one at that. But at the time, my first son had just been born. He was 6 months old. I was watching him 3 days a week, trying to balance my day job as a journalist and a studio musician with taking care of my first boy, Jude. I was like, how am I going to do this? And what I realized is I can do this taking my dog for walks around the block. And 90% of my Reels to this day are made in a 10-minute span where I just walk my dog around the block in the snow or in the muck. And I just think, what was a time in my recovery that I was facing an obstacle and what helped me get through it? And I stopped writing scripts. I stopped even coming up with concepts. I just walked around the dog, got some fresh Vermont air, and I did it. And I was like, I said to myself, if this goes viral or even semi-viral, great. But the discipline of doing that in itself, when I can't make it to a recovery group, when I'm taking care of my kids and my job and my home, when the weight of the world is too much, that camera is my confessional. And I don't ever want to lose that. And of course, I'm a performer. I'm going to be driven by, like you say, that dopamine hit, by liking people's reaction to what I do. Ironically, I'm not egotistical enough to say I don't have a performer's ego. I'm not going to be one of those people say, oh, I'm not in it for the instant gratification of social media at all. That's always, I'm a human. I love my art or my performance being seen.
Yeah.
But that's not always going to happen. But what is going to happen is every time, regardless of 1 or 1 million people sees it, I'm seeing myself. Because when I hold my phone up, it's my reflection. And regardless of whatever filter, whatever caption I put on it afterwards to hit the algorithm or whatever, that's me on that raw camera screen before any of that. So if I'm not willing to look myself in the face and speak on what I'm going through honestly in a way that I can look in my reflection and be like, yeah, that's it. That's the gift for me. And the views, the followers, the opportunities, like this incredible platform that you're doing now with the podcast and the beautiful platform you built on Facebook and TikTok, all that's cake. But the real sustenance is being able to speak to begin with. Because when I was in early recovery, I was afraid. And so whatever the internet does, that's what it is for me, man. That moment with the phone and the clarity that I got from the people far wiser than me that I'm able to share now and do my best to speak on.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, it's another similarity I'm seeing between us. Before 2019, it's when I started the platform. I wasn't even on Facebook. I was on it, like I had an account, but I didn't log in. I didn't have the app on my phone. I created the account on a computer back in whenever, 2004 or something like that, and then just didn't get on. And I would make fun of people that were on social media. And then when I got sober, I got this itch to help people, right? And how do you reach people nowadays? It was social media. And then I got on, and it's just funny how things kind of eventually took off. And I wrote this book, and there's a section in the book talking about finding your healthy addiction and how that can actually be a superpower, how our addiction can be a superpower for us. It's a fine line. It's a very fine line that I find myself getting on the wrong side of often, but just to say that social media can sometimes consume too much of my life because I'm so laser focused on it. So I have to be careful with that. But it's funny that you bring that up. Another similarity between us, and then the whole fact of like just, you know, putting your camera in front of your face and just going for it and making it to where you can record, edit, and publish a video within 10 minutes. It's perfectly in line with how today's algorithm works. They want you to publish so many times per day. And there's truth to that. Like, if I've noticed a big difference between publishing once a day and publishing 5 times a day. There's a big difference in when your stuff starts to take off. And if everything's polished, if you spend hours and a ton of time on every little video or every little thing you do, you're going to get burnt out really quick. So making it authentic and making it to where it's just you and it's easy actually, you know, supports the idea of you reaching more people and putting more content out there. So I love how the algorithm works in that fashion. You know, when I first started this, everything was very polished. I don't know if you know much about A String of Hope, my platform, but when I started it, let's take a step back a little bit. Before I started it, I had this idea that I needed to make a documentary series about people in recovery. I was learning how to build guitars at the time, and I thought, you know, how about I weave my guitar building into these stories of recovery? And it was just an idea, but I didn't have any gear, but it kept nagging me and I kept putting it off. And what I mentioned earlier about helping one person, that thought kept popping back up. It's like, man, if I could do this and help one person, I have to do it. Again, didn't have any gear. So I just started doing it with this, you know. I shot the first 5 episodes with my cell phone, and nobody knew, man, because I put so much production into it, as far as, you know, the editing and going and finding stock clips to make it just really presentable. And it did well, and it did help people, and it was awesome, and it's still awesome. You go back and watch the old episodes. But when things started to take off, it was when I just sat in front of the camera, didn't do anything to it, just added some text. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, Shaq's sharing one of my videos and things are going nuts. And it's like, okay, well, you just don't know. So I think it's really cool, man. I love it. Keep doing it. Keep getting in front of your camera. I think some of the things, actually all of the things you say, are extremely powerful and important. Even if it's something that, you know, maybe I disagree with, or maybe some people disagree with, there's other people where it's really going to resonate with them. And you just got to keep doing it. Just keep on keeping on.
Yeah, man. I think that it's okay if people disagree.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those people who thinks that respectful disagreement is a great thing. I think any conversation, even if it doesn't get heated, even if it's not a tacit understanding that it's a disagreement or it's two diametrically opposed sides, is two people finding convergence points where their shared and differing experiences align in interesting ways. If everybody was coming from the same experience, the same standpoint, and the same collective understanding, there would be no shared growth. And what I like to say on all my lives is, if you disagree with me, if your experience is different with me, please share it. Because me just sharing my experience is a one-sided conversation. That I might be an original creator on a reel, but the reason the reels with the most views share the most knowledge is not because more views make my video any different. It's because if you go through the comments, you see a wealth of knowledge that exponentially expands beyond the parameters of the original piece of content. Communities are born through pieces of content from different creators, far beyond me, you, or anybody else specifically. And that collective mind of knowledge that emerges when people begin speaking openly about addiction, recovery, mental health issues, medical issues, any type of challenge they're facing in their life, even if one person's solution for navigating that is diametrically opposed with what worked for you, like tough love, compassionate love, enabling versus cutting people off, abstinence versus MAT. No one's going to have every single experience, but everyone is going to have their personal experience. And if your experience is different than mine, that's beautiful. because it just means that I accept that my experience isn't going to help everybody. So it's glorious that people are out there with different experiences and different ways to help people. Man, I would not have it any other way. It would be exhausting if one creator had a monopoly on everything and had an answer to everything. That person would get burnt out quicker than a matchstick, bro. I mean, like you say. So I welcome people being different from me. I love to see someone with a contradictory point of view, because if it's said respectfully and with love, I'm like, talk your talk. Talk your talk, brother, sister, whatever. It's amazing to see that, because it just shows the diversity of the community.
Yeah, things would get pretty boring pretty quick. You know what I mean? If we all thought the same and all had the same views on everything. So I agree with you, man.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Just wanted to drop in and give a quick plug. Check out my book, Renewed Self Toolkit. It's a workbook based on the 9 tools I use to change my life. Also, if you're interested in being a guest on my podcast, visit my website, benfisherinspires.com, and fill out the submission form. We review every submission, and we consider people from all walks of life. Now, if you're interested in becoming a part of the growing community of people dedicated to changing the world, visit the Joy Academy tab on the site. We would love to see you on our weekly call. And lastly, have you subscribed to the podcast yet? Please do so to help us reach more people with a positive message. Together, we can make a difference. Thanks again, and let's get back to the interview.
I want to ask you a little bit about your path and what led you down the path that you went down. I don't know your full story. I know bits and pieces from the stuff that I've watched, but I'd love to know kind of the beginning of it. You know, you don't need to go into your childhood necessarily, unless that's a huge part of it and what caused it. But what do you think led you down the path to addiction?
I'll give you 5 key points. I'm 3 years old. I'm in a shopping mall, and I'm screaming under a table because it's too much with my hands over my ears. I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder as a young kid. And there's a phenomenon called sensory overload, where whether it's looking people in the eye, receiving social signals, sounds, sights, tactile sensations, it's too much, and it feels like nails on a chalkboard in a synesthetic, all sensory sense. My brain does not know how to process external signals. And the irony is that long before I took my first drink or used, I turned to external solutions for an internal problem. It was approval from other people. I'm a late stage millennial, so it's Pokemon cards and it's video games. And I would fiend for approval from others. I would fiend to be the center of attention, get that natural dopamine rush like you were talking about with social, long before computers even had anything but dial-up. What ended up happening is when I took my first drink, it wasn't the first sip of alcohol I'd ever had. I don't count that as my first drink, because that was just curiosity. But when I saw what alcohol was doing in generating false euphoria and taking me outside of my anxieties through a crude physical external solution, and I took a drink with the intention of doing that, that's when I realized that I could chaotically bypass my underlying issues with this fleeting, destructive, ephemeral solution that I thought was the elixir that was going to magically take all of it away, but ended up destroying everything in my life. Because the more my tolerance for it physically, in terms of the chemical, but also emotionally and spiritually increased to the point that it just became like white noise. From the first drink I took in that suburban basement in DC, growing up the son of 2 Ivy League educated journalists, to the last time that I picked pieces of drywall mixed with crack out of my carpet and used a bent rig to shoot up black tar out in San Francisco, or stamp bags or scramble caps in New York and Baltimore when the Fetty was starting to hit. It's all the same impulse. It's all the same scared little kid under the table, hiding from sensory overload, hiding from myself, hiding from my insecurities. My parents were good people. I'm the great grandson of an Oscar-winning composer. My family is nothing but musicians, journalists, teachers. But that didn't stop me from the needle in my arm on Turk Street. That didn't stop me from crashing my car after a 5.5 of whiskey and a hangover and a Xanax blackout. because no matter where I was born feeling uncomfortable in my skin. And I had a lot of privileges on the other side with my family helping me get into treatment. But the ultimate privilege that I had was my mom is 5 years herself in recovery. And the most messed up thing is that all the love that she gave me, she got sober in 2011, a year before my opioid addiction started in 2012. So for the first 5 years of her recovery, she witnessed the worst 5 years of my addiction. And now we're both in long-term recovery today. And she's been a shining example for me, man, because she has mental health issues like bipolar, intense depression, different stuff. But she's been able to navigate it through her chosen program, a choice which served as a blueprint. Because I grew up with kids who grew up in trailer parks and in the worst hoods of DC, who now own six-figure businesses and are in long-term recovery. I grew up with kids uptown that did the same. And I also grew up with kids uptown whose parents had them in embassies and mansions out in Potomac. And all that got them was a nicer box. And the box we put ourselves in, regardless of our external circumstances, is all up here. Because ironically, a lot of the worst benders that I had were in my grandmother's posh Manhattan apartment. And a lot of the most sober time that I have had and the most incredible life-changing experiences have been in crack-in-the-wall meeting houses in places where you would never expect the seeds of hope to flourish. But just like the little grass going through the cracks in the pavement, man, there is hope there that you cannot buy with the biggest check, that you cannot artificially plant. And so I guess the simple answer to that question is I was never comfortable in my own skin, and I turned to an external solution, and I ran away from my underlying fear for so long. And what saved me was understanding that I was better off and it would be easier to run towards the truth. And that's hard to do, but it's possible. And I think everyone deserves to do that while they're still here.
Absolutely beautiful, man. We got another thing in common. We both have good parents. My parents, they call themselves my biggest fan, and they've said that for a long time. Like I said, I was a musician growing up. And they were at every show. My dad was like the sound guy at every show and the roadie, and they've had my back through everything. And I had a meeting with some friends last night, and I told them, like, if I didn't have that support, I know for a fact I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be alive today. So I get really grateful, but also I wonder why I have that chance and so many other people don't, because a lot of people have really bad upbringings. They have parents that aren't so great. They're working through their own things, and they're causing a lot of pain to their kids. And I can't say that everything was sunshine and rainbows with my parents, but 95% of the time it's like they were just really good people. So it's cool to hear that. I'm curious about the autism. You brought that up. Can you tell me more? Like, you mentioned that, you would hide under the table, and you were hiding really because you didn't feel there were a couple different things that you talked about when it came to hiding. I'm curious about the autism, and I'm curious about, how do you hide now? Do you hide?
The best way that I can put it is that if you have a computer that's running on current technology and you have a slow DSL connection with a slow trickle of information, right?
Mm-hmm.
The information going to the computer is very slow, but the computer can process it in an orderly fashion. That is what I believe to be a neurotypical, everybody's different, everybody's unique, don't get me wrong, everybody's got a different type brain, but a non-autistic functioning type brain. And I'm not a qualified psychiatrist, I'm just speaking from my own experience and how I have come to terms with this versus the other people who have engaged in CBT and psychiatric and psychological modalities and how they break down their stuff on the other sides. For me, what I can crudely describe as my experience as someone with autism is I'm the exact opposite. I am an ancient 1990s IBM or iMac with a T1 connection. I have a brain that is very bad at sorting and processing external input but I got this huge sieve of information massively and transparently, torrentially cascading on me at all moments. There is no filter in my world. Every single visual input and every single audio, sensory feeling or social reaction that I engage with gives me so many micro reactions within my mind that it's impossible to sort even with a perfect filing system. And so what ends up happening is that my metaphoric RAM and hard drive gets so overloaded that I cannot process it. Even though my mind is sorting it, it's not doing it in the right speed. And so what ends up happening is I can't process facial expressions in real time. The only way that I can understand, I mean, I know what a smile is, I know what a frown is, but those little micro expressions, those facial cues, I would literally have to study movies and like incredibly obvious examples of the transitions of facial expressions in order to teach myself how to navigate everyday interactions with other kids. And so I essentially became a second-rate AI algorithm where I taught myself how to socially interact, and I created artificial constructs, which I still use to this day, to use a series of generalized modalities of face types, not like how people look, but how their faces are moving, tonal variations. And to this day, I still have a really hard time understanding sarcasm, especially over text, because I'm not tapped in to the universal consciousness of social maneuvering. And so do I hide? I don't hide. I fully transparently embrace and vocalize my shortcomings. And that was my problem all along, is I thought that I had to be stoic, which you do. You got to be stoic to survive life on a daily basis. And I'll make it this clear. I'm not a victim. This ain't no sob story. I don't feel sorry for myself because I have autism spectrum disorder. I'm grateful for the ways it allows me to process specialized kinds of information, because when I dive in and I ride with the current of words, of music, of any other hyper focus, I can surf with the best of them today. But I'm open about the fact that if you see me standing on the side at a social event, not talking to anybody, little wallflower plant for like an hour, I'm not judging anybody. I am processing and analyzing what is going on so that I don't say tactless things, so that I don't move out of order, so that I don't overstep, and most of all, so that I'm courteous and respectful. Because the same thing that a lot of people see when they walk in a room, they're like, oh, there's this social construct, there's this thing going on, there's this interpersonal emotional dynamic. I literally have to consciously analyze in real time based on my past experiences, not in a natural way, in a very proto-cognitive way, to ensure that I don't move wrong and set myself up for hurting other people or destroying social dynamics. And it's been a process, man, and I still have a lot to learn. But I guess the real moral of the story for me is that the things I thought made me weak and made it impossible to connect with other people and love myself eventually laid the groundwork for me developing my own partially artificial and partially self-won resiliency, where even though I have these shortcomings, I've sublimated them into a system that allows me to cope with life on life's terms today that I had to build myself.
So going back to the concept of, our addiction actually being able to be a superpower, do you feel the same way about the autism? Do you feel like you can use the term superpower if you want, or you mentioned that it gives you different abilities, and you hear people talk about that all the time when they talk about autism. It makes people better in certain areas of life. Do you feel like that's the truth in your case? Or
there's a video game called The Sims where you have different bars for cleanliness, social ability, money, like just different attributes to cope in this existence we call human life. I think that the best way for me to describe it is that the problem with a lot of people, whether they have verbal or nonverbal autism, whatever form it takes, is finding a way to align one's skill set with the life that you're living in a manner that makes it possible. The best way I can describe it is when I was 7, 10, and 15 years old, and 3, with developmental specialists, they all said the same thing. my verbal and small motor skills were 98th percentile. My social and large motor skills were 5th percentile. So knowing that and knowing where you stand, there's a very big decision that needs to be made. Do you tunnel in completely on what it is you're passionate about and let everything fall by the wayside? Or is it possible to use the skills that you have in one piece of your life, not just to further down on that with the passion, whatever it is, and it can be anything from working in the trades to music to pursuing a doctorate degree, or being a plumber, electrician who specializes in those systems. But maybe, just maybe, that same hyper-focused understanding can be diverted to learning how to up those other skills just a little bit. So I do think autism spectrum disorder can be a superpower, but I think that unless we're willing to divert some of the hyper-focused energy that comes from it, from our favorite and most comfortable mediums, into analyzing the other aspects of our life, life becomes very difficult. Because the main thing that I struggled with was friends and relationships with women growing up, because it was a mystery to me. And now I've met the love of my life and I have 2 kids, and my courtship and my meeting my girl and meeting the friends I've made is different than other people's. And I had to use the hyper analytical skills that I had to figure out how to, I don't know if this makes sense, but just be a human being. And I think that the main thing is, with that Sims bar video game analogy, which is autism spectrum as heck on its own, I won't even go there to be real, is imagine if you could take a little bit off of your cleanliness bar and put it on your social bar on The Sims. You can't do that unless you're at a certain point. But that's what I try to do. I try to use the hyper-focused aspects to make myself more well-rounded. And that actually helps me in my recovery too, because it allows me to see the areas objectively where that could be better. And instead of despairing that I'm relegated to having them be negative and entrenched in this dismal, abysmal place forever, I can take some of the skills I have and put them towards that. So that's what I think. It's a superpower, but like, Peter Parker's Uncle Ben said, great power comes with great responsibility. And for me, that responsibility is not just being happy with the fact that I can compose a piano sonata on the fly, or like freestyle rap, or write articles quickly. It's like, yeah, you can do that, but how about your mental health and your general interactions with your spiritual life, your mental wellness, and the people around you? And as long as I can do that, it's gravy.
Yeah, there's always that ebb and flow, the give and take, one thing for another thing. I could talk about this for hours, or listen to you talk about this for hours. It's very, very interesting. And I'm curious. I hope that this podcast makes it to somebody who might be, diagnosed with autism, and they might be in a place where they're wondering, is there something wrong with them? And how do they proceed? How do they get through life with how they are? And I hope that this can bring some clarity or some ideas on how to maybe think about things a little bit differently. I think that's a very, very interesting and very unique thing that we just discussed there. I appreciate you being open and honest about it.
Yeah, I appreciate you even bringing it up, man. I don't think enough gets said about ASD.
Yeah, so our struggles make us who we are, right? That's what we're told. That's what a lot of people believe in recovery. And you hear a lot that, people talking in meetings, and they say that they wouldn't take anything back. All the bad things that happened to them, all the bad things that they did, they wouldn't change anything because it's made me who I am today. My question to you is, do you have any regrets?
One of my favorite sober rappers, his name is The Real Young Swag. I've had the privilege of sharing a stage with him once at the same event in Maine that I'm going to be doing this year with him and Kalichi, another one of my favorite recovery artists. I have a line from a song of the Real Young Swags called Shackles and Chains, which is, if I knew then what I know right now, then I probably wouldn't have learned my lesson. So today, if today me, knowing what I know from that, had the ability to go back and change it, you bet.
Yeah.
But see, the knowledge that I have today would not be it's like a conundrum. It's like a time travel conundrum, because if I went back and I undid those mistakes, then the me that suffered through those mistakes wouldn't have learned the lessons that brought me to the point I am at, the place I could have navigated and made the better decision today. So the reason I don't have regrets is not because in my objective recovery viewpoint today, with the principles and the lessons and the tools that I have accrued over time, would not do it differently. It's that I don't think I would have gotten to the point of desperation and need for self-awareness that I would become. I wouldn't undo it because I wouldn't be at the point where I would be able to undo it today. So I'm at peace with it because, yeah, there's a million things that with my perspective today I would have done over, but I know that I wouldn't have this perspective were it not for those mistakes I made and the lessons I learned from it.
Yeah. It's a conundrum. I think that's the best word to describe it, man. That's for sure. Because I feel very similar. It's like, man, I wish I could go back and not say that thing. I wish I could go back and not do that thing or do those things. But also, it's like one of those things led me to my rock bottom, which led me to quit drinking for good, or at least quit drinking up until this point. Like, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the next day. I know I'm not going to drink today, and that's kind of how we have to live. But yeah, I don't know if you call that regret. I don't know if regret's the best word for it, but I certainly feel like it sometimes, that I regret saying certain things or doing certain things. But it's nice and fluffy. It feels good. It feels good to say, like, I am who I am because of the things I went through. And it's hard to think about, like, yeah, that's just straight up regret. So I love the way you put that. I'm going to go back and listen to that a few times because I think it was very eloquently put.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. What's the hardest thing you've been through in your recovery?
14 days into treatment is, even though I don't say it as my sobriety date because it's not my chemical sobriety date, was the biggest lesson I learned through my entire recovery. There have been harder times, like when the pandemic hit and the group stopped meeting in person and my whole life got put on hold. That was very humbling. Even though it's been the greatest gift of my life, being a parent has made me reframe a lot of things. And there have been some harsh transitions in terms of self-care and stuff there, even though my boys, Jude and Max, are the biggest gifts in my life. But the toughest lesson I had to learn was that addiction isn't just substances. It's everything external. And I made a mistake, which is 4 days into recovery. I was told that you should avoid relationships for the first year. And I fell for a girl that I met in treatment, and people set us up, and I hooked up with her, and I made her my drug. And it was selfish because I was projecting all my insecurities and fears and needs onto another person who was healing herself from a lot of things. And when she stopped talking to me because of a Dawson's Creek recovery romance soap opera rumor that got started, I literally packed my bags, as cringe as it sounds, and was like, I'm leaving. And I used code words over the phone with my family to not throw her under the bus that were about my like past relationships where I had similarly ditched like college and other things, because I'm a runner. When I would get broken up with, it wasn't just like, dope sickness or whatever. When I was love sick, when I was heart sick, I would run away from a town. Dropped out of school because of that type of stuff, didn't go back. And, friendships ended, didn't have to be romantic relationships, creative letdown, whatever. I was gone. So I was sober. I had detoxed off all opioids and all meds that they were giving me. I was stark raving sober, but I packed my bag. I called my family, and I had like, a couple $100 left on my debit card, and I was going to take a cab, and I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania at this rehab center. I was going to take a cab to Kensington and Philly and just check out. I was sitting in the rehab counselor's office, and there was this reflective surface. It might have been a mirror. I don't know. It might have just been like a shiny metal thing, but I saw my appearance clear as day. And there were scabs and pock marks, and my face had a scraggly beard, and the eye circles under my eyes, even worse than I am now at 33, because I was living that life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling the treatment counselor, oh, I'm going to go to another treatment center. I wasn't going to go there. And she's just like smiling, giving me this same half-lidded gaze as anybody who's leaving against medical advice. But I didn't fool myself that time. And I stayed not for me and the reflection I saw underneath, but going back to that scared kid under the table, I didn't think I was worth saving. I didn't think I was worthy of not just making it through the detox, but through the emotional detox where I have the revelation, hey, the world isn't responsible for solving your problems. Other people are not obligated to be emotional drugs for you. And just because you've kicked dope and crack doesn't mean that you can expect the world to be a magical field of instant gratification that blooms and blossoms for you whenever you step in the right direction. And that's when I realized, don't get in the cab, like stay. No matter what happens, stay. And I did not end up with that person. And thank God, because, I never would have had the kids I have, never would have had the life I have, never would have had the relationships before in recovery that served as lessons, just like the moments that made me want to use, gave me cravings. It all goes into the same pile of experiences that shaped me. But that was the moment where I realized I was not just responsible for staying chemically sober. I was responsible for staying sober emotionally and not relying on any other external circumstance to get my validation or my juice. And I've faltered in that, just like I've had cravings to use, but that's been the underpinning backbone of my recovery. And I'm grateful that it happened at that point when I was in a treatment center and not when I was outside. Because when I was outside, I would have called the plug. I would have done this and that. And I had other heartbreaks down the line where I texted the plug and they didn't pick up, and thank God. But that was the moment that made all the difference, man. And I'm grateful for it, even though at that time it felt like my whole world was caving in because I had to learn how to be emotionally responsible when I barely knew how to stay sober. But that was probably the most deciding moment in my recovery.
Yeah, it's fair. It's funny. It's extremely cliche for you to shack up with a girl in rehab. I've seen hundreds of memes, joking about that. So I think it's funny you've experienced it, as a lot of us have. And the whole heartbreak thing, man, that's no joke. That's nothing to mess around with. That's really what led me down. I started drinking really young. I was an alcoholic at 13 years old, although I wasn't drinking every day at that point. Like the first sip I took was like, oh, this is what I need to do to feel normal. So I was an alcoholic at that point. But I had my heart broken. I was about 21 years old, just moved back from Florida to Cincinnati and was dating this girl in Norris Lake, Tennessee. And she broke up with me over a text. And next thing I know, I'm all down in the dumps. This factory I worked at, dude puts a couple pills on the table and says, take these, it'll make you feel better. And I took them, and they made me feel better. And that started a roller coaster for me for years. And it's funny because not even a month later, I met my wife, who's my wife now, right? We dated for 7 years before we ended up getting married, but she had no idea that I had just started down this path of addiction, and I hid it from everybody, including her, even after we got married years later. And it just goes to show the power of a broken heart and the relationships. And when we put so much trust into other people, and so much faith in other people, and we put so much of ourselves in other people, our happiness, our happiness is dependent on this person or this thing. And, when you do that, you doom yourself to negative consequences. I wonder, when you were telling your story, I wonder if you were planning on leaving to go use. And I assume yes. And I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you didn't, man. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're clean. I'm glad you're sober, because you got so much to offer. And
Thank you. It gets real out there.
that kind of segues into a couple things. Like I'd love to hear, if you don't mind telling me, what was your rock bottom? Like what sealed the deal for you? And I know there was probably multiple attempts, but what was the last time?
My dad seeing me have a withdrawal seizure where they had to hit me with benzos IV to keep me from snapping my own neck from tardive dystonia. Didn't do it. My friend's starting to die. Didn't do it. Abscesses, picking cigarettes out the gutter. That didn't do it. What did it was when I went up to New York to meet with a friend who also dropped out of college with me. And I used to use with, who is now multiple years sober. The last time I heard, he's working as a treatment tech or in the treatment industry, which is a beautiful thing. And we picked up a couple bundles of dope and like half a ball of white. And we're in this seedy motel in New Jersey because he's been kicked out of his parents' home. And, you know, I hit with like 4 bags, did a fentanyl-laced dope shot that would probably take a lot of people out. And, you know, I'm only alive by the grace of God because I was playing roulette every time once the Fetty hit the streets. And it got me physically high, but it did not get me emotionally or spiritually high. The screaming kid under the table still had his hands over his ears. And that was the point where I realized I had 3 options. If fentanyl-laced heroin was not taking away my pain, that was the end of the line. And that was my drug of choice. And I could try to keep using and hope that it would come back, try to come up with some cocktail, maybe add in some pills, like more Coke or whatever, and see if it got me there. I could try to intentionally pass away, which I had done several times before to no avail because of luck or tolerance, I don't know. Or I could really try to get sober. And I'd been to rehab, inpatient, outpatient, you know, MAT, the whole 9 yards. I'm not knocking MAT. I fully support MAT recovery, but it didn't help me. It was just a crutch in between binges for me. Even though I fully support it for other people, I support all paths of recovery, but it didn't work for me and didn't keep me sober. And so 5 days later, I called the treatment center myself, not my family forcing me like it had been in the past. I did it for me. And I did it with the needle in my arm, but I called him. I didn't think it was going to work. I just knew that what I was doing was not working. And the sad thing is, you know, I started with perk 5s and went through 30s, Dilaudid to dope to fentanyl dope over a period of years. And I know for a fact that if I had started using in the climate that exists today, where nearly every pill and every bag is laced, I would not have lived because my tolerance would not have time to develop. So every time I hear about a young kid passing away from the Fetty dope or fake blues today, I'm like, that's me. Because the only reason I'm alive today is because it wasn't like that back then. But I had a chance for my addiction, which many kids don't have today who get started on the same path I did, for it to progress for years to the point that my neurologically tapped brain gave out and the dope didn't give me what I needed anymore. And that's what set me on the path to recovery.
So how'd you do it? How'd you get clean?
Well, I went to an inpatient treatment center because my very generous grandmother, she rest in peace, she never struggled with addiction, but she never gave up on me. And she, long before I started using, she helped me with my autism spectrum issues because I hated making eye contact. I still do, but she would always gently grab my cheeks and say, look at me, dear. And she always had a soft spot for me because she knew I had issues. And so when she learned about the full extent of my addiction, that it had progressed from pills to shooting fentanyl and smoking crack, she immediately paid whatever the insurance didn't cover. And that's a blessing that many people do not receive. A lot of the kids there didn't have the privilege I did, and they had state insurance, or they were there as part of a jail program. And that 14 days hit, they sent them on a bus right back to Philly or Jersey, or wherever they came from. But when I got there, they said, we're going to give you a 14-day Suboxone taper. And I was like, bet, give me whatever you can. I didn't think I was physically capable of going through detox because you got to remember, the last time I had tried to fully detox, no MAT, no opioids, anything, I had gotten a seizure off of pure opioid withdrawal. I wasn't even
Wow.
on benzos or alcohol at the time. I don't know how it happened. It was weird too. It
Yeah.
wasn't mal. It was tardive dyskinesia. It was out there. So I thought that was going to happen again because that's the last time I had gone more than 2 days without any opioids in my system. But by the third day, I was already sick as hell because it wasn't doing enough. And so I just ripped the Band-Aid off and I was like, give me the nausea meds, give me whatever, but I'm done. And they're like, nah, you're not done. They tried to keep me on it and that's their protocol. But I was like, nope, I'm already throwing up. I'm already not sleeping. Like, I'm done. And, you know, I know people who MAT for years have saved their life. I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, you got to taper off immediately or whatever works for you. But for me, 3 days in, I had to rip the Band-Aid because I knew it was just delaying the inevitable. And the funny thing about it was I wanted the instant gratification of going through detox and being on the other side the same way I wanted the instant gratification in active addiction. So I used that need for instant gratification to propel me forward. But then I left rehab. I went to a recovery house. I went to my chosen fellowship and I worked with some beautiful people there who guided me. And that's been my path ever since. But that's how the detox process worked for me.
So treatment worked for you, man. Like I think that's great. And I love that you mentioned that you believe in all paths to recovery. I do too. There's multiple paths to recovery. What matters is that you keep trying and you figure out what works for you. You know, a lot of people, they screw up, they fall flat on their face trying one thing and then they give up and they keep going and maybe they don't make it back, you know? And I just say to them, try something else. Try something new. Don't worry about how it looks, you know, or what other people say or think. If you think it could help you, give it a try. Because what matters is that you're alive. And this disease and these drugs, they're, like you had mentioned, they're killing kids quick, you know, they're just so strong. So love that you are on the same page with me about multiple paths to recovery. I believe that as well. I went to treatment and it didn't work for me, at least at the time. I'm not saying maybe it would have worked if I went to a different place, but the place I went to, you know, I started an outpatient. At this time, I had actually weaned myself off of Suboxone. I got myself on Suboxone and, you know, tapered down myself. And before I got married, I'm like, I'm going to be off of this stuff. For multiple reasons. One, I wanted to be off of it. Two, is I wanted to stop. We were about to have a joint bank account as a married couple. And it's like, how am I going to explain that I'm paying this doctor, you know, $200 a month or whatever it was? Like, she's going to ask, well, what is this? So had to figure that out. And I did. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life was get off Suboxone by myself without anybody knowing. Still at this point, nobody knew I was going through that, but I did it. And I was proud of myself for doing it. But my alcoholism took front seat. The way I got through it was I stayed drunk all the time. And that's how I got through it. So I ended up going to treatment for that, for alcoholism, started an outpatient, failed a drug test, you know, with alcohol. At that outpatient, they told me I couldn't be in the program unless I went to residential. Went to residential, did it, was obviously sober in the treatment center, got out, and immediately went and bought a bottle and chugged it and fell flat on my face. And I'll tell you about my rock bottom on another day. But, you know, I had an experience that scared me enough to say, okay, that's enough. It was on Easter Sunday, 2016. So we got sober on the same year, bro.
Love it.
You mentioned something about, I didn't think I was worth saving. And I think that's a very powerful thought. And I think it's a thought that a lot of people in active addiction have. You know, they just don't think they're worthy. They think they've made too many mistakes. They've dug the hole so deep that they can't get out of it. What would you say to someone who's struggling right now? And it doesn't have to be directed to somebody with addiction. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this with you, a lot of people are struggling right now. Hope is at an all-time low, at least from my perspective in the world. What would you say? Give your best, you know, spiel to somebody who's looking at you and they're like, there's nothing left for me. It's all over. what would you say?
The same anxiety, doubt, fear, and pain and uncertainty that pushes us towards a bottle, bag, pill, rig, pipe, glass pushed me towards recovery. I don't think there's a magic set of words that you can say to anybody who is in the struggle, because the struggle is deeper than words. I think everybody has their own moment where they become willing to accept that no matter if they've been Narcaned 100 times, been in and out of jail or treatment 100 times, lost the trust of their family, friends, anything, that they deserve to be sober, not as punishment, but because they're good people who deserve to live a life that gives them more than what the bag, the bottle, the pill can give them. And what I would say is the same things that made me think I was incapable of getting sober, that same fear, that same constantly perpetuating, agonizing, defeatist mindset of I'm destined to fail. I think that when I realized that that level of certainty, that level of conviction was not something that was exclusive to the mindset of actively using addiction, I realized, imagine if I treated making it to another day sober like I treated life when I had no money, no wake-up bag, and the plug wasn't picking up his phone. If I took the same invention, resourcefulness, energy, motivation, and applied it to life in recovery, which is easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
And I took the faith that I had put into the bag and the bottle, and I put it towards a longer-term method of gratification. My life could be whatever I wanted it to be. And I'm not saying it's going to be what you want it to be immediately. I'm not saying it's going to be what you want it to be in the depths of active addiction. What I'm saying is the things I was afraid of became my ultimate blessings. The things I thought were holding me back became the biggest pillars of my recovery. And no matter what you've done, even if you've done bad things, you're not a bad person and you deserve a better life. And the bag and the bottle ain't it. I'm not here to demonize anyone for using. There's a reason we use, but there's also a reason we get sober. And the reason we get sober is not because we're bad people who deserve the punishment of withdrawal, but because we're good people who deserve to make it through the punishment of withdrawal to the life we really deserve, which is about connection, warmth, love, truth, and embracing our inner selves rather than pushing it to the side like that last bag or bottle we just threw in the trash. Y'all deserve a better life, man. So go and get it. Your future sober self's cheering you on, and they're dying to meet you in that reflection on the other side.
Epic, bro. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I want to echo what you said. You know, anybody that's listening right now, you have purpose, you have worth. And no matter how far gone you feel like you are, there is a way back, and life can be good. Also, what Benjamin said is you're not a bad person. You may have done some things that are viewed as bad, but we all have. We've all made mistakes. I don't care how good somebody looks on the outside. They've made mistakes in their life. So there's a way back, and there's a sunny side of the street. And all the cliche things that people say, it does get better, and we wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. It just does. So I hope that anybody that's listening to this that needs a little bit of hope, and it goes for people that aren't struggling with addiction too, whatever you're dealing with, there's a different path. And all it takes is just making a few changes, and maybe it's one change. Maybe it's one thing. For me, it was one thing. It was alcohol, and maybe for you, it's something different. And I'm wagering to bet what that thing is. You're scared to change it because you're scared of what's going to happen when you do. it comes down to that desperation thing. You don't have to wait for things to get so bad. You don't have to hit rock bottom. You can change before you hit rock bottom, and it's probably going to be more comfortable. And take it from Benjamin here, and people who have a harder rock bottom than I've had in life. I've talked to many people about this. They'll tell you too, like, you don't have to get to that point. So I thank you so much, man. Like, I really think you're going to do incredible and big things with your music. I want people to be able to find you. Will you please give me a little shout out to where people can find your music and where you want them to listen?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Spotify is Benjamin Lerner, Apple Music, YouTube, all them streaming services. My primary platform is Facebook for the recovery content, and the music is Benjamin Lerner. The address is facebook.com/BenjaminLerner.clean. It's a mouthful, but Instagram, Benjamin.Lerner, TikTok, Benjamin Lerner Recovery. And what I highly recommend is that, in addition to my platform, if you're in recovery and you're looking for positive recovery affirming content to fill up your feed, don't just go to my page, go to a bunch of different pages, man.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of beautiful stuff out there.
I agree. Get as much as you can. Take as much as you can. I appreciate that, man. And please, anybody that's listening, please go check him out. His stuff is pretty amazing and inspiring. And again, that's why we're here. We're here to inspire. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening. If you believe in what we're doing here at the Inspire Sessions, the best way to help us is to subscribe. The world is full of negativity, but I believe there's a shift in consciousness coming. And you and I together can be a big part of that.